Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we will journey through the uncharted territories of Sri Lankan design landscapes with Sachini Ibildeniya. She is a multi-award-winning UK-based Sri Lankan executive creative director with a portfolio featuring global giants like Gucci, Google, and Audi. Sachini dives into breaking taboos, fostering diversity, and sparking a transformative creative revolution. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hello everyone. Can you all hear me all right? Perfect. Okay, so firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for having me here today. So my name is Sachini Ibildeniya, and I'm currently the ECD and co-founder of a newly launched content agency in London called House of Oddities, or Who for short. It's so new that our website isn't actually going live until next week, so you've heard it here first, hot off the press. So as you can see on the slide behind me, I'm going to be talking about the dreaded elephants in the room and how Sri Lanka needs to break free from some of its old prejudices to spark a new creative revolution. But before you're forced to listen to my voice for the next 40 minutes, I thought I should quickly show you my new agency's reel so that you can get an overview of the types of projects that I've been working on recently and a better understanding of what I'm about. So let's hope this video plays. Right, so let's get started. So it's a real honour to have been asked to speak at this incredible three-day festival. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm a British Sri Lankan that was born in London, and despite my terrible English-sounding attempts to speak Sinhalese, my relationship with Sri Lanka is one that I hold very close to my heart. Like most of you in the room, I'm a proud Sri Lankan, so I feel incredibly privileged to be here today in front of you all, and hope that this talk won't disappoint. So my background is actually in graphic design and art direction, and over a 20-year career, I've moved from working in editorial at places like the Sunday Times magazine and GQ into more of a commercial and advertising landscape with a variety of clients across video, TV, film, radio, social, digital, events, and pretty much everything in between. And what I've noticed is that the past 2 decades has really seen Sri Lanka being positively elevated into the limelight globally. It's especially clear to see that we're finally getting the recognition we deserve across things like food and travel. This year, Sri Lanka has been ranked as one of the top 20 destinations in the world by Condé Nast Traveller. And in London alone, we're seeing very popular Sri Lankan restaurants popping up all over the place, with tables being booked up months in advance and people queuing to get in. And pretty much every English person I know at the moment seems to have visited Sri Lanka at least once and loved it. The Royal Greenwich Maritime Museum is currently hosting an exhibition featuring 37 South Asian creatives that are leading the way in the UK. And I was honoured to be included in it, and surprised to see that quite a few of the people featured were also of Sri Lankan descent. So this feels like a moment for Sri Lanka to take its place on the world stage and finally get the recognition it deserves for its design, innovation, and creativity. But as I visit this year, as I have done so many times over the last few decades, I still see a lot of the same old problems getting in the way of Sri Lanka's creative revolution. I call these the elephants in the room. Now, you might argue that because I live and work in London, and it's a very different world, how can I advise young creatives in Sri Lanka when I don't share their challenges and experiences? Well, over the course of this talk, I hope you'll realise that the challenges you face today are actually very similar to the ones we have been facing in the UK. Let's take hyperinflation, for example. While not to the same scale, the UK has been suffering from austerity and a cost of living crisis for over a decade now. This has meant that, like yours, our print industry has significantly shrunk. And like Sri Lanka, we had a tough lockdown during the pandemic, which shifted more audiences online and meant that even though there were more people consuming content and advertising than ever before, this wasn't translating into sales for our clients. Like Sri Lanka, the UK has seen a much wider gap between the rich and poor and an erosion of the middle class. The consumers who are the main drivers of our industry, and people are generally spending less and buying only the essentials. Fortunately, we haven't yet had the horrific queues for petrol, but I honestly don't think that we're that far behind. And politically, I'm sure you've all heard of the triple-headed disaster that is Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, and now Rishi Sunak. So not the same, but similar. And I hope that by showing how I have tackled some of the challenges I've faced or worked around them, you can be inspired to shoo away the elephants in your rooms and have the freedom to embrace your creativity in a way that transforms the industry for the better. So here's my list. Number 1, fair and lovely is not fair and lovely. Number 2, making things is not as hard as it seems. Number 3, failure is good. And number 4, there are no sacred cows. So let's start with number 1. Fair and lovely is not fair and lovely. I know this is a topic that has had recent coverage in Sri Lanka, but I still think it's an issue that we need to talk about. Colorism is real, and this skin lightening product, renamed Glow and Lovely in 2020, despite the recipe remaining the same, is still one of the most popular cosmetics brands in Sri Lanka, even 45 years since its first launch. How many of you have ever been told by your parents and relatives to keep out of the sun in case you get too dark? I've always been dealt the narrative that fair is lovely and therefore that dark is bad. It's a statement that's played to us throughout everyday life and has been for as long as I can remember. Black is constantly portrayed as a negative. A black cat crossing your path is bad luck, being the black sheep of the family, blackmailing someone, blacklisting someone, the ugly duckling being the darkest in the bunch. The list goes on. Growing up in London in the 1980s with the Brixton riots and hostile environment, the rise of fascist groups like the BNP and the National Front, it's fair to say that even Britain still believes that fair is lovely. I was the only dark-skinned person on a team of 50 at my first job at the Sunday Times magazine in London, and I once had an art director who wanted to use my hands in a photo shoot for the cover of a magazine, but only if he, of course it was a he, could Photoshop them white. And in 2018, Kanita Shenoy, editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine Sri Lanka, was forced to leave her post and give up her career in journalism altogether because she refused to promote the brand and endorse these harmful beauty standards in the publication. You might be thinking that such racism doesn't exist in the industry anymore, especially after things like the unlawful killing of George Floyd, which spearheaded the Black Lives Matter movement, and #OscarsSoWhite in the US. Maybe it's changed. Well, it really hasn't. Taiwanese model Shireen Wu was photoshopped by a fashion label who used AI to replace her face with a white model. That was less than a month ago. Never mind the ongoing sexism in advertising that, despite it all, still seems to think that scenes like this sell alcohol, clothing, and perfume. The cultural harm this causes is huge. For women especially, the impossible ideal has always been marketed to us, to encourage us to buy the face creams, the bleaching agents, the waxing strips, and the diet pills that don't make us happy, but do make us poorer. But the international tide is turning, and you all, as the next generation of creatives, can help to make a more equitable landscape moving forward. Edward Enninful became the first black editor of British Vogue and features people of colour regularly. In February last year, he released this infamous cover featuring 9 very dark-skinned models in a bid to push the boundaries of not only beauty standards, but the entire fashion world. A year prior to that, I myself actually featured on the cover of High magazine. And as a dark-skinned person myself, who has designed and art-directed magazines featuring white faces for decades, this was a real honor. The features editor explained to me that High have also been actively trying to turn the narrative on colorism within Sri Lanka by featuring more dark-skinned individuals and providing them with the platform to shine. I also founded a photography and illustration agency that champions artists from the 4 most underrepresented groups in the UK's creative industry. That's women in general, people of colour, people with disabilities, and people from working class backgrounds. I made a conscious effort to produce and publish work with a heavy focus on dark skin. I'll quickly play the show reel so that you can see that for the UK, this really is a positive step in the right direction. But despite all of our efforts to turn the tide, there's still so many discriminatory incidents that occur on a daily basis, like Gucci pulling a sweater from its collection after it was criticised for racist undertones, the same with a pair of shoes by Katy Perry, a jacket by Moncler, and a charm by Prada. So I can call on all of you to use more dark models in your creative work, to push back on the idea that fair is lovely, and together we can hopefully overturn this long-held racist view, and remember, of course, that your creative work will stand out as a result. After all, if we flip the script on this racist narrative, it's much easier to see the one black sheep in a flock of white. Right, so moving on to my second elephant in the room. Making things is not as hard as it seems. Sri Lanka's biggest export is fashion and textiles. It's 52% of all exports and 3 times bigger than tea. Sri Lanka exported $5 billion worth of apparel last year for brands including these. Yet to my knowledge, Sri Lanka hasn't produced a high-profile, internationally recognizable fashion label of its own. So what does this mean? Well, we're seeing the effects of Sri Lanka's financial and political crisis and how it's hugely affecting garment workers, with the government now rushing through dodgy changes to labour laws and domestic debt restructuring measures targeting workers' social security funds. Garment workers in Sri Lanka will be deprived of even more basic rights and protections. I don't want to underestimate how devastating this is, or to try to demean the harsh conditions garment workers still suffer in Sri Lanka today. So when I say that making things is not as hard as it seems, I know that actually it's physically hard work, I get it, but I would argue that creating something new and innovative, creating a globally valuable idea, is harder. And until recently, that doesn't seem to be very apparent in Sri Lanka's DNA. For example, one of the leading nations in the world for innovation is Scotland. Scotland has invented the telephone, the television, the internet, the steam engine, penicillin, the fridge, contact lenses, colour photographs, and flushing toilets. The US invented electric lighting, the cinema, the aeroplane, and jazz. In the UK, we celebrate ideas people who invented things like the newspaper, the microphone, purple dye, neon, and the vacuum cleaner. Moving closer to Sri Lanka, India has a proud history of innovation, creating indigo, refined sugar, plumbing, table tennis, and the check. You get the gist, right? So my question is, what is Sri Lanka's greatest invention? We can celebrate the world's first female prime minister, possibly the first ever hospital, and of course the highest number of wickets taken in one-day cricket. But we're now living in an ideas economy, where the biggest assets of any company are its brands and its intellectual property, and not just tech companies like Google, who don't make anything in the physical real world. Over 60% of Coca-Cola's market capitalism, or value, is built on its branding and secret formula. In the modern world, money comes from ideas. So I believe that it's vital for Sri Lanka and you in the creative industry to start fostering a more innovative and entrepreneurial spirit. And there's nothing wrong with learning from others, building on what has gone before. But remember, while stealing might be fine in the art world, we are not just artists. So we have to be original. As mentioned previously, I recently co-founded an agency called House of Oddities. And our one rule is that for every campaign, for every idea, we have to go a different way and not produce the same old content that anyone else might come up with. Your clients will expect you to come up with ideas that help promote their brands or sell more products, but audiences won't pay attention to your messages unless they stand out in some way. Difference isn't just good, it's vital. Over the course of my career, myself and my brilliant teams have dangled flying cars from balloons for Kia. We've done fashion shoots with seat belts to help save 1 million lives for Volvo. We've tried to tackle period poverty with Skoda, photographed a very, very heavily pregnant Olympic gold medalist for British Airways to inspire the next generation of athletes, covered tennis legend Roger Federer from head to toe in plaster to create a flying sculpture for the Venice Biennale, investigated the art of breaking rules with Patek Philippe, created a very important and successful campaign that helped to reduce the number of male suicide rates for the Movember Foundation, and filmed a poem called You Clap For Me Now in lockdown that went viral, being viewed over 300 million times worldwide and being officially selected as the global message of hope and solidarity by the United Nations. Now, I've seen some really nice work coming out of the design community in Sri Lanka, but what I'm really looking for when I study all of the work at the festival is genuinely innovative and fresh ideas that will help to push Sri Lanka into the forefront of design, not just at a local scale, but at a global scale. Which moves me on to my third elephant in the room, which is failure is good. What do I mean by this? Well, it's not easy to upend 45 years of belief that fair is lovely, or becoming not just a designer but an innovator with new ideas. You're going to fail, maybe lots of times. I just want to make sure that you understand that that's okay, because for a long time I didn't think that. Now, to give you a bit of context, my mum, who I think just walked into the room, is my hero. She's actually in the audience today, and no, she didn't pay me to say that. She's an inspiration to me because in the 1960s, she was part of that generation that moved to the UK as a nurse to effectively help save Britain's failing healthcare system. As the eldest of 8 siblings, she left her life and family to start a completely new one on her own in a country with a completely different culture and where not many people looked like her. So we talk about bravery all the time in creativity, but to me, that's real bravery. For a client a few years ago, we went to visit a very small town in Wales where my mum first trained to be a nurse in the UK. And it still hit me then just how hard that must have been to go from everyone and everything she'd known and loved to this rainy, cold, windy little town halfway across the world. So she inspires me to be brave, but she will also be the first to admit that as kids, she was tough on us. She had to be, as my dad passed away when I was 10, so she raised us mostly as a single parent, and wanted to make sure that we got good grades, found good jobs, and eventually married good people. Although I must admit, I've completely failed on the last point and have instead become a crazy cat lady. Sorry, Mum. But she's what we in the West call a tiger mum, someone who fiercely pushes their children to succeed. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, my brother is an amazing orthopedic surgeon, and my sister works in planning and development for the local government. And then there's me. I mean, I might have not gone down the traditional doctor-lawyer route, but I am at least here on stage right now. But one of the unfortunate byproducts of this tiger mum trait is that you're taught that good enough is not good enough. I remember coming home with a test paper once where I'd come top of the class with 98%. I was very excited. My mum's response? What happened to the other 2%? And I'm sure that will resonate with lots of people in the room today. I do think it's a Sri Lankan trait to always push to excel, to succeed at all costs, to be a perfectionist. I know I am one as a result. But there's a cost to that. And the cost is thinking that if you don't get the best marks or the best results, then you're a failure, and that failing is bad. Makes sense, doesn't it? Failing is bad. Nobody wants to fail. We all want to win. We don't want to be a loser. But in the creative world, we have to fail. Einstein said, "A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new." We spend a lot of time talking about creativity. We celebrate the wild idea, the beautiful film, the clever poster. Nobody likes to talk about the failures. At awards shows, we applaud the campaign where everything went right, where the execution was flawless and the results amazing. We don't ever mention the failures, but failing is the only meaningful sign of progress. It means you tried something new, something hard, maybe something impossible, and you learned from it. The playwright Samuel Beckett said, "Try again, fail better." When we fail, we learn. When we learn, we grow. And when we grow, we innovate. All those Cannes Lion or D&AD pencil winners with their successful campaigns, they all failed in order to get that success. But nobody likes to talk about it. We're all marketing ourselves endlessly as gurus, visionaries, and experts, buying into our own advertising about how everything we touch turns to gold. In advertising, failure is the last taboo. I think that's wrong, because the failure is the purest essence of creativity. You can read 1,000,000 books about what creativity is and how to be more creative and how to generate those award-winning ideas. But the truth is that the answer can fit onto a post-it note. Try again, fail better, until you get to somewhere new, until you stop failing. Failure really is the purest essence of creativity. We love creativity. And clients love creativity because it works harder for their business. Stefan Vogel, CCO of Ogilvy and Mather Germany, said that nothing is more efficient than creative advertising. Creative advertising is more memorable, longer lasting, works with less media spend, and builds a fan community faster. It's true. After extensive studies over decades, Harvard Business Review concluded that €1 invested in a highly creative ad campaign had nearly double the sales impact of €1 spent on a non-creative campaign. We love creativity, don't we? Well, not as much as we think. The World Federation of Advertisers produced a global report, Clients and Creativity, that found a weird disconnect between how marketers talk about creativity and how they use it. 82% of marketers agreed that creativity is a marketing superpower, but only 28% said they saw creativity as business critical. Why is that? It turns out we have a bias against creativity. New research has found that we hold an unconscious bias against creative ideas, much like we do in cases of racism, sexism, or in phobias. Even those people who had explicitly ranked creativity as high on their list of positive attributes showed an implicit bias against it. Not only that, they exhibited a failure to see creativity for what it was when directly faced with it. And that's because of two big flaws. The first flaw is that we think of creativity and failure as two different things. We love creativity, but we hate failure. If we can have the creativity without the failure, then we'll totally do it. Which is a bit like saying, I'll only book the ad spaces that work. But it's an unequal partnership. Without the failure, there is no creativity. But without the creativity, there's still failure. Maybe not a spectacular nosediving failure, but a failure nonetheless. We don't bag the award, we don't win the pitch, ace the interview, boss the phone call. We didn't get double our money like we would have with a creative campaign, yet we don't see it like that. We, or our clients, or both of us, think it's safer to have a modest little idea than that could either be a spectacular failure or a huge success. We think, I love that radical new idea, but I'm only buying it if they can prove it will work. We think, let's just copy what everyone else is doing, that seems to work for them. Or we think, at least then I won't get fired, right? Then there's our second big flaw. We have built an industry that tries to rationalize creativity, that works out the ROI before the idea. We use A/B testing, focus groups, statistics and big data, demographics and psychographics to try to make informed bets about how our creative will work. And then we change the idea based on those rational inputs But creativity cannot be rationalized. It lives in our intuitive mind, beyond a capacity for language, where all of our feelings live. I clearly love an Einstein quote, but as he so eloquently put it, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. We do this, try to rationalize the irrational or quantify ideas until they can be represented by numbers on a spreadsheet because we are afraid, not of failure, but of uncertainty. The fear that we might possibly fail is more frightening to us than the fear of failing. Or in the case of the above, the certain doom is more comforting to us on an emotional level than the possibility of doom. That might sound strange, but it's rooted in science, in biology. Since the caveman days, when a rustling bush might mean a gust of wind or a jaguar determined to eat us, we've become really, really adept at treading uncertainty with a fear that floods our bodies with adrenaline and gets us ready to fight or flee. And though we like to pretend we're much more sophisticated than we were back then, we're not. This talk here today is a good example. Extensive studies have shown that for some people, a fear of public speaking is more terrifying and provokes a more powerful psychological response than the fear of death. Yes, of death. And I get that. You may or may not have noticed, depends if you can see how much my hands are shaking right now, but I'm actually a very introverted person. I like to be the one that's behind the camera, in the shadows. And this, being up here in front of all of you, is my absolute worst nightmare. It's an irrational fear, sure, but that doesn't make it any more comfortable up here, whereas certainty is comforting. Charles H. Dewell, Commissioner of the US Office of Patents, said in 1899 that everything that can be invented has been invented. He urged the closing of the patent office as there no longer was a need for it. Darrell F. Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox, said in 1946 that TV won't be able to hold on to any market it captures after the first 6 months. People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. We love it when people are completely certain, right up until the moment they're proved completely wrong. So we have to embrace uncertainty. We have to get up on the stage we're so scared of, and we have to learn to love it. Love failure because it's worth it. James Dyson created over 5,000 failed prototypes before he came up with a working bagless vacuum cleaner. Lady Gaga's first record label dropped her after 3 months. Henry Ford went bankrupt twice before building a car that would revolutionize both the automotive industry and industrial manufacturing. Steven Spielberg was rejected 3 times from the USC Film School because his grades were so poor. If they can fail and learn and be better ideas people as a result, well, that's the stuff for us. So we love failure, even though we're afraid of it. And that's because the more you do it, the less scary it seems. Walt Disney, no stranger to failure after he went bankrupt 4 times and was even booted out of the advertising industry for not being good enough, said, "I think it's important to have a good, hard failure because it makes you aware of what can happen to you. Thanks to that failure, I've never had any fear in my whole life when we've been near collapse. I've never been afraid." And if that's got you all fired up for creating something new and falling flat on your face in the name of failure, you might be thinking, where do I start? Which brings us to our final elephant in the room. There are no sacred cows. Now, of course, I know that there are sacred cows, and I mean no offense to any Hindu audience members today. I promise I'm not after anyone's cows. But in the UK, the term sacred cow means something that is beyond criticism or question. An example of that is economists would argue that free market capitalism creates the most prosperous society, even though back in Britain we have a failing healthcare service, more potholes than you do here in Sri Lanka, record unemployment, record homelessness, and a crony political class that keeps stealing from the public funds to line their own pockets. I'm sure a lot of that sounds familiar. That argument that free market capitalism is good is a sacred cow, and you're not even allowed to question it. You could also argue that fair and lovely is a sacred cow. Well, if you want to be truly creative, you have to not only question these sacred cows, you have to slaughter them. These implicit rules and taboos get in the way of being truly innovative and creative. Another example, I recently directed a TV advert for a children's charity, which I sadly can't show you just yet as it doesn't launch until the end of January. But the ad features a pair of knickers that are stained by period blood. Already I can see people shocked that I would even say that on stage. I'm shocked that I would say it on stage, if I'm honest, but especially with my family in the audience, because the instinctive reaction to periods, to menstruation, whatever you want to call it, is to not talk about it. It's not the done thing, it's taboo. And showing it on TV, even worse. This is actually such a stupid sacred cow. Every second person in the world goes through period pain, every month. Every woman has had blood in their knickers at one time or another. More people have been affected by period pain than by the common cold. We might not want to, but we should be able to talk about it. Because when you talk about things that are taboo, you can learn something new that can help you get through it. Another sacred cow is mental health. Sri Lanka has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, with an average of 6,000 deaths per year and nearly 100,000 people attempting suicide every year. Yolanda Foster of Amnesty International says that mental health is not openly discussed in Sri Lanka. This is linked to cultural taboos and the stigma attached to mental disorders from a social perspective in both the Sinhalese and Tamil communities, which contributes significantly to the problem. And when you think about it rationally, that's really strange. Why would we ignore something that is killing such a huge proportion of us? As a slightly weird experiment, I looked up the most common terms online for death and Sri Lanka. And one of the biggest stories reported focused on a man trampled to death by an elephant after trying to hypnotize it in 2019. Now imagine that there was a rogue elephant in Sri Lanka, but it attacked 100,000 people a year and killed 6,000 of them. We'd all be talking about that, wouldn't we? That's why I feel so strongly about killing off sacred cows, things that you should or shouldn't do or believe simply because an ancient tradition or culture says otherwise. I hope that my talking about these issues will help some of you to be more open about your own elephants in the room rather than hiding them away. But we've strayed off topic. You might ask, what are the sacred cows of advertising and design? So let's tackle a few of them here. Number one is it's all about the data. I read a quote recently from the founder of the boutique agency network in Sri Lanka about the impact of the pandemic. They said we had to strategize, focus on data-driven practices and on certain types of media and creatives. I don't disagree with that, but you have to be careful about allowing data to drive creativity. Data can help steer you in the right direction, and of course having proof helps convince clients that your ideas will work, but it's not a magic bullet, and I've seen too many instances where data has killed a creative brief. Oscar-winning director Martin Scorsese talks about this a lot. Despite working with streaming channels like Netflix, he hates the power the algorithm has over what content is being made. He said films aren't being made because they have artistic merit or tell an important story that people should know. Instead, they greenlight films that have a built-in audience that just wants more of the same. Because simply put, data can only test known quantities, not unknowns. As Henry Ford, founder of Ford Motor Company, put it, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Finding a balance between the two is vital. My favorite quote about this is from Steve Babcock, Chief Creative Officer at VaynerMedia. Creativity without data is just art, but data without creativity is neglect. So remember, when you get the data, pay attention to it, but don't let it override your own creative instincts. Which takes us to sacred cow number 2. It doesn't work like that. This has happened a lot in my career, and I'm sure it will happen to you too. That well-meaning senior designer, art director, or even tutor has a look at your work and solemnly shakes his head and says, we don't use X like that, or Y doesn't work like that. What they mean is, follow the tried and trusted formula. What they're saying is, don't try anything new. But really, you can and you should. Take Comic Sans, for instance. Universally hated as the worst possible font, Comic Sans has always been a sign that you don't know how to design. Unless you make beautiful abstract posters out of it, like this artist. These are from a series of posters for an art book called Comic Sans for Cancer, designed to raise money for charity. Or if you care about your audience. The British Dyslexia Association recommends Comic Sans as it's easier to read for dyslexic people. So don't use Comic Sans actually isn't very good advice on its own. But lots of senior people will try to pass on sage advice like this in a bid to educate you about how things really work. Why do we do this? Creativity, after all, is subjective. What might work for me might be horrible for you, and vice versa. But that doesn't make it wrong. We have a rule at my new agency, which is everyone is entitled to an opinion, but it will only be listened to with reasoning. What that means is, if you don't like something, you can't just say, I don't like it. Well, you can, but nobody will listen to you. What you have to ask instead is, does this work? And if you think it doesn't, you have to give more of a valid reason than, I don't like it. And speaking of doing things we don't like, moves us on to sacred cow number 3. Creators create, salespeople sell, marketers market. If you enter the creative side of a business as the designer, the art director, the illustrator, then you probably think you can relax while the salespeople go out and sell your vision to the world. Or you'll get frustrated because the salespeople seem to get all the glory from your work while you toil away in the back office. It shouldn't be this way. Every designer, every creative should think of themselves as a salesperson first. For an introvert like me, that means the scary prospect of meeting clients, delivering pictures, giving talks like this one, and generally being more visible than I would like to be. But I can't stress how important it is. Nobody understands your vision like you do, but if you can't articulate it and convince others to agree with you, then you don't get to make it. Learning great sales skills is useful for convincing clients to go with your best creative ideas, convincing art directors to try new things, or getting talent to agree to that new campaign. When I meet new creatives, I always want to see how well they sell themselves and their work as much as I want to see their portfolio, because the greatest salespeople will get to make the most creative work. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be pushy. No one likes a pushy salesperson, so we're never going to like pushy designers. Remember instead the golden rules of sales. Listen, empathize with your client, try to sell what they want rather than what you've got, be friendly but not too familiar, and learn how to close the deal. This wasn't taught to me at college, but if you learn great sales skills, you will inevitably become a more successful creative. Right, so I feel like I've talked for a long time now, so I'll just summarize if I can. We've talked about the elephants in the room, those big obstacles that block creativity, but which not many seem to want to acknowledge or talk about. That means stop pretending whiteness is the ideal and embrace a more diverse view of beauty. It means hone your craft, but always remember to become an innovator, an ideas person, not just a manufacturer. Don't be afraid to fail. In fact, try to fail as often as possible so that you can learn from it. And don't just accept the spoken wisdom, the sacred cows of people in the industry who should know better. And that probably includes me. So now I shall stop trying to give you advice and instead hand the mic over to you, the most important people in the room, because you're the next generation of creatives that will help Sri Lanka take its rightful place on the world stage for design, innovation, and creativity. So if you have any questions, please ask away. And if you can't think of any right now, feel free to reach out to me on the contact details on screen. Thank you. Any questions?
Sasha, I just want to ask, in terms of, with what you mentioned for the sacred cows, so to speak, I think one of the biggest hurdles in Sri Lanka is that there are a lot of sacred cows in the boardroom of companies who actually give out the creative brief for an agency. How do you tackle that? Because most of the time when it comes back, they want to go with the proven methods.
It's really hard, and I've been in that situation a lot, and I think that's why I've set up my own company, because I think the solution was difficult. When you're working for big companies and you have people that are institutionalized in a certain way, if you are junior in that company, it's very hard to push back, but I would say keep trying, because I think the reason people hire certain people is to bring in a fresh perspective and get a kind of new idea. But at the same time, you come with a fresh perspective and they'll push you back and say, we want to do the same old thing. So I keep trying to push at it, but obviously there's only a certain amount you can do. You know, depending on how senior these people are and, how strong their opinions are. But I would say always keep trying to fight your corner, and, I'm sure one day then it'll work.
So it's sort of breaking away from what was just asked to you, but the adage of if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So a lot of people continue with the old because there's a safety and there's a certainty of what the end result will be. So if you were to use a white model, you know for a fact that people are so used to the thing that they're probably likely to navigate towards products that are sold by a white model as opposed to a black model. The only way to change that is, as you said, you slowly start shipping into what we're comfortable with and what we're familiar with. But how long do you think, in terms of a quantity, in terms of a time frame, do you anticipate the fashion industry will have to keep shipping at the familiar so that our mindset changes, that we start accepting this new thing as a certainty of success?
I think it's a bit like some of the quotes that I shared in the deck. Like Henry Ford was a perfect example of saying if he actually just asked everyone what they wanted, they would have said, we want a faster horse. Because I think people don't know what they don't have, and they are used to the familiar. But I think you have to innovate and be brave and try new things in order to move things forward. Otherwise, we'll all be in the same place, in the sort of 1920s or 30s. So I think innovation is key. And I think, yes, people can always make the same things over and over again. But I think it's the bravery in trying something different and trying something that's exciting and hasn't been done before that will kind of put you on a higher platform and get recognised more globally. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. So it will take time, though. Essentially, it's not a.
It's not something that will happen overnight. But I think the advertising industry is a good example. I think at the moment, people are so scared of saying the wrong thing or doing the right. I don't know what it's like in Sri Lanka right now, but in the UK, as an example, I think after things like the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd, there's this whole thing about diversity, but people are taking it to a different level where they're kind of creating these super diverse but unauthentically diverse ads because they're trying to tick all these boxes, and it's not very natural and authentic. So I think at the moment, I'd say the UK advertising industry is quite kind of static because everyone's so afraid to do anything or say the wrong things. They're all trying to be too PC and kind of trying to tick all the boxes and please everyone, that it's like taken all of the bravery out of it. Whereas advertising used to be really brave in the UK, and you'd get these amazing kind of crazy ads. You don't get that as much anymore. Everything's too safe. So I think it's kind of finding that right balance of pushing the boundaries, but obviously, and not just trying to tick boxes for the sake of ticking boxes, but doing it in a really kind of authentic and genuine way. I don't know if that answered your question either.
It did. Thank you.
Anyone else? Can I leave? Yeah? Go for it. I said I'm terrified of public speaking. Keep the questions coming, it's totally fine.
Hi, so how important, like I saw your stats on that YouTube video you did for during COVID
Yeah.
to all the health professionals there. So how important do you think timing is to your creativity? Like when you're coming up with ideas, there's obviously a window for an idea depending on the environment. So how important do you think that timing is to?
I think it depends on the context. I think with that example in particular, that happened to be obviously good timing because it was at the beginning of the pandemic, but it wasn't something that we created thinking it would go anywhere. It was something we created just because we cared about it and it was really important to us as a personal project, and it just happened to go somewhere because it was the right timing and people seemed to resonate with it. So it did go viral, but it wasn't the intention to create something to go viral. We created something just because it was important. And I think that matters probably more, is to create something that you care about because you care about it. And if it goes somewhere, it goes somewhere, rather than kind of trying to make something big, if that makes sense. I think like the passion is key.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question because there is another panel starting soon as well.
Okay, we saw some great stuff. So, how did you pitch these things to the clients? Like, what do you have any tips and tricks, or like general way of like, going about sort of pitching these sort of things? And obviously, you have made a name, and the name itself, the agency, you know, that places you in a certain box. But before you got to this point, how like do you have any experiences, stories, or like, you know, something that
I think
we can.
There's such a variety of clients. There are some clients that are just really safe and really scared to do anything new, and then there are other clients that are willing to do something brave. Obviously, having the brave clients is the ideal scenario, but a lot of the time you will have clients that are too scared. So I think it's kind of, and a lot of the time those clients aren't creatives either, so they don't understand creativity. They're more sort of, salespeople or business people. So I think it's explaining to them in a rational way why that brave idea will work, and why you think the results will be powerful. So as long as you can kind of explain it to them in a way that they understand, they're more likely to come on board with that. I think a good example is we did some scripted films for Kia, and they'd never done something like that before. They were kind of animated, and it was completely out of their comfort zone. And a lot of they said no to us for about 3 months, and we kind of kept going back and showing them scripts and saying this could work, and showing them the kind of rationale behind long form content and how it works, and giving them kind of some sort of results to prove that this kind of thing could work. And eventually they agreed to it, and the results were amazing, and it worked, and they came back to us for more. But it was a journey, and I think you do have to go on journeys with clients that can take a long time to kind of crack and break. And it's scary because you don't know if it's genuinely going to work or not. But I think when it does work, the results are amazing, because obviously it's recognised, and the awards and the sort of PR that you get from that is, you can't beat it. So I think it's worth trying to push boundaries as much as you can and get people out of their comfort zones. And like I said, if you fail, it's fine. Next time it will be better. So at the moment, because I've just started my own agency, I'll take money from anyone. But but I'd like to be in a position where I can filter clients and only work with clients whose kind of vision I believe in. So I like working with social purpose-driven clients. So I'd like to be at a point where I can pick and choose, and I only work with clients that are trying to make the world better, because that's kind of my dream scenario. Right now, I'm like, you're an oil company, I'll take your money. No, but I don't want to do that. But obviously, it's hard when you start your own business and you're starting from scratch. You have to, take clients from wherever you can. But I definitely wouldn't like to do that forever. I'd like to be at a point where I only work with clients that are trying to do something positive to the world. And that's what kind of drives me, I guess, is using creativity as a force for good, rather than just creating a handbag ad because it's selling a handbag. That's not what I like doing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sachin, for sharing such valuable insights and inspiring the next generation of Sri Lankan creatives. Can we please give her another round of applause? I would advise everyone here to hold on to their seats as we start the next panel discussion at 3 o'clock, where you'll get to pick the minds of the most brilliant business and creative minds in the country with our panel, Culture as an Export.